The moment you stop being nice, people finally start respecting you, and the psychology behind this will change how you see every relationship in your life. Let's be honest with ourselves for a moment here, because this is something that most of us have felt deep down but never wanted to admit out loud. Being a good person doesn't automatically earn you respect. In fact, if you've spent years being the accommodating one, the agreeable one, the person who always says yes and never rocks the boat, you've probably noticed something deeply frustrating. The nicer you are, the more people seem to walk all over you. You watch others who are blunt, who set firm limits, who don't bend over backward for everyone, and somehow those people command rooms, earn promotions, get invited to the important conversations, and never have to wonder if people are talking behind their backs. Meanwhile, you're picking up the slack, paying for dinners nobody thanks you for, and wondering why your kindness never seems to come back around. Here's the uncomfortable truth that nobody wants to hear but everybody needs to understand. People don't disrespect you because you're lacking something. They disrespect you because you are constantly sending signals that say it's okay to disrespect me. You are broadcasting, through your words, your body, your reactions, and your choices, that you are someone who can be pushed around without consequence. This isn't about your character being flawed. This isn't about you being weak or broken. This is about strategy. The difference between someone who gets dismissed and someone who commands respect in every room they walk into is not personality. It's a set of deliberate, learnable psychological principles that anyone can apply starting today. Over 15 years of studying human behavior, analyzing thousands of interpersonal dynamics, and working with people who transformed from doormats into people others naturally defer to, 3 critical differences have emerged that separate the respected from the dismissed. And understanding these 3 principles will fundamentally shift how people treat you starting tomorrow. The first principle comes from one of the most influential minds in psychology, Alfred Adler, the founder of individual psychology, who introduced a concept called the separation of tasks. Adler argued that nearly all human suffering in relationships stems from one of 2 mistakes. Either you invade someone else's emotional territory and take responsibility for their feelings, or you hand over your own emotional autonomy and let others dictate how you should feel about yourself. The people who consistently get disrespected share one devastating pattern. They carry other people's emotions like it's their personal homework assignment. They think things like, if I don't do this favor, they'll think I'm a bad person, or if I just endure this and stay quiet, everyone will be more comfortable. These thoughts feel noble. They feel like maturity. But they are the exact mechanisms that train people around you to treat you as disposable. Consider the story of Mike, a 48-year-old senior manager at a mid-sized company in Chicago. Mike was known around the office as the nicest guy on the floor. When junior employees made mistakes and dumped their unfinished work on his desk, he'd laugh it off and handle it himself. When a younger colleague asked him to help move apartments on a Saturday, not a work task, a purely personal favor, Mike showed up with a smile because he believed that's what good leaders do. He told himself this was mentorship. He told himself this was building loyalty. He told himself this was character. But here's what was actually happening behind the scenes. When promotion season came around, not a single one of those junior employees recommended Mike. Worse, they openly joked in group chats that Mike couldn't say no, so they could pile anything on him without worry. In team meetings, someone actually said out loud, "Mike will agree with whatever we decide, so let's just make the call ourselves," as if his opinion literally didn't exist. Mike was gutted. He'd spent years investing emotional labor into these relationships, and the return on that investment was zero respect. He finally sought help from a therapist who introduced him to Adler's separation of tasks, and the realization hit him like a freight train. Other people's disappointment is their emotion, their problem to manage, their homework, not his responsibility to fix. When someone felt let down because Mike didn't do their job for them, that discomfort belonged entirely to them. Mike had been volunteering to carry weight that was never his to carry, and in doing so, he had taught everyone around him that his boundaries didn't exist. Mike started practicing one simple shift. When unreasonable requests came in, instead of automatically saying yes, he responded with something like this: "That falls outside my responsibilities, and I think we all serve the team best when we handle our own assignments." The first time he said it, people were shocked. Some were openly annoyed. A few even complained that Mike had changed, that he wasn't the same team player he used to be. But here's what happened within 3 months. Because Mike now said no regularly, his yes suddenly carried enormous weight. When he did agree to something, people recognized it as meaningful. When he did offer help, it was received as a genuine gift rather than an expected service. The office stopped seeing him as the pushover they could exploit and started seeing him as a leader with clear standards and self-respect. He was promoted within 6 months. The lesson here is profound and worth sitting with. Respect doesn't come from satisfying everyone around you. Respect begins the exact moment you stop trying to satisfy everyone around you. Every time you say yes when you mean no, you're not being generous. You're teaching people that your boundaries don't exist, and people instinctively lose respect for anyone whose boundaries they can't find. The second principle draws from the research of Albert Mehrabian, a social psychologist whose communication studies revealed something that should fundamentally change how you present yourself in every interaction. According to Mehrabian's findings, when we communicate face-to-face, the actual words we say account for only 7% of the message the other person receives. 7%. The remaining 93% comes from two sources: 38% from vocal tone, the speed, pitch, volume, and confidence of your voice, and 55% from visual cues like your posture, gestures, eye contact, and how much physical space you claim. This means you could be saying the smartest, most insightful things in any conversation, but if your body is hunched, your voice trails off at the end of sentences, your eyes dart away from the person you're speaking to, and you physically shrink yourself to take up less space, people's brains will automatically register you as someone without authority, someone who doesn't fully believe in their own words, someone who can be interrupted, talked over, and ultimately ignored. People who get consistently dismissed tend to share specific nonverbal patterns. They fold their arms protectively across their bodies. They avoid sustained eye contact. They end statements with an upward inflection that turns every declaration into a question. And they habitually apologize before stating opinions, as if their very thoughts need permission to exist. By contrast, people who command respect without saying anything particularly remarkable tend to do the opposite. They stand with open posture, their shoulders pulled back and down. They maintain comfortable eye contact without staring aggressively. They speak with downward inflection at the end of sentences, which signals certainty. And perhaps most importantly, they occupy space confidently. They don't shrink to accommodate others physically or conversationally. Take the experience of Linda, a 52-year-old woman living in suburban Dallas who had spent decades feeling invisible in social settings. At neighborhood gatherings, school functions, book clubs, and community meetings, Linda consistently felt like wallpaper. She believed her habit of covering her mouth when she spoke, of looking away when making a point, of prefacing every opinion with phrases like "this is probably wrong, but," or "I don't know, maybe, I'm not sure." She believed these were signs of humility and good manners. She thought she was being polite. What she was actually doing was telling everyone's subconscious mind that her words weren't worth listening to. People interrupted her constantly. When the group decided on restaurants or venues or activities, nobody bothered asking Linda's preference because her nonverbal signals had already communicated that she didn't have strong preferences, that she would go along with whatever everyone else wanted, that her voice in the decision literally didn't matter. Linda learned about power posing, a concept supported by research from social psychologists studying the relationship between body position and hormonal changes. The science suggests that holding an expansive, confident posture for as little as 2 minutes can increase testosterone levels, which is associated with confidence and assertiveness, while simultaneously decreasing cortisol, the stress hormone that makes us feel anxious and small. Linda began a simple practice: Before every social gathering, she would spend 2 minutes in a private space. A bathroom, her car, a hallway. Standing tall with her shoulders back, chin slightly lifted, hands on her hips or arms spread wide, breathing slowly and deliberately. Then she changed her verbal patterns. Instead of trailing off with "I don't know, never mind," she began finishing her sentences with clear, downward-inflected conclusions. Instead of "this probably doesn't matter but," she would say "I see it differently, and here's my perspective." The content of what she said didn't change dramatically. She wasn't suddenly delivering brilliant speeches, but her delivery transformed completely. Her voice was steady, her eye contact was direct, her body was open and grounded. Within weeks, the same people who used to talk over her began pausing when she spoke. They began asking her opinion specifically. They began treating her as someone whose thoughts carried weight. Several people even commented that Linda seemed different somehow. More put together, more confident, more like someone you'd want leading a committee or planning an event. Nothing about Linda's intelligence or knowledge had changed. What changed was the 93%, the nonverbal wrapper around her words, and that shift alone transformed how every person in her social world treated her. The third and perhaps most powerful principle comes from Murray Bowen, the psychiatrist who developed family systems theory and introduced the concept of self-differentiation. Self-differentiation refers to a person's ability to maintain their own values, beliefs, and emotional equilibrium, even when surrounded by people who are reactive, aggressive, manipulative, or emotionally chaotic. A person with low differentiation is like a small boat in a storm. When someone around them gets angry, they either get equally angry and escalate the situation, or they collapse into fear and submission, doing whatever it takes to make the uncomfortable moment stop. Both responses, matching aggression or cowering in submission, hand your power directly to the other person. They confirm that the other person's emotional state controls yours. A person with high differentiation, however, is like an aircraft carrier in that same storm. The waves crash, but the vessel barely moves. When someone is rude or aggressive toward a highly differentiated person, that person doesn't absorb the emotion. They observe it. They recognize it as belonging entirely to the other person. They remain calm not because they're suppressing their feelings, but because they genuinely don't experience the other person's outburst as a threat to their identity. This is the ultimate power move in human dynamics, and it's illustrated perfectly by the experience of Dave, a 55-year-old man who ran a small restaurant in Austin, Texas. Dave dealt with difficult customers regularly, and for years his responses fell into one of two patterns. Either he'd match their energy, raising his voice and arguing back, which always made the situation worse and sometimes scared away other customers, or he'd immediately capitulate, offering free meals and groveling apologies to make the confrontation stop, which only taught aggressive customers that throwing a fit at Dave's restaurant was rewarded with free food. One evening, a customer began shouting over something trivial. The food took 8 minutes longer than expected, pounding the table and causing a scene that made every other diner uncomfortable. Dave felt the old familiar surge of either fight or flight rising in his chest. But this time, instead of reacting, he did something completely different. He said nothing. For 5 full seconds, he simply looked at the man with calm, steady eye contact. No anger, no fear, no apology, just absolute stillness. Then, in the lowest, slowest, most composed voice he could manage, Dave said exactly 6 words. "What would you like me to do?" The effect was immediate and almost theatrical. The angry customer, who had been escalating specifically because he expected either a fight or a surrender, suddenly had neither. The psychological framework he was operating from, "I yell, you either yell back or give me what I want," completely broke down. He stammered. He looked around. He actually lowered his voice. Within 30 seconds, the situation was resolved without Dave giving away a single free item or raising his voice a single decibel. Dave understood in that moment something that changed his entire approach to conflict. Aggressive people are playing a game that requires your participation. They need you to either fight back or fold. When you do neither, when you simply stand still, hold eye contact, and respond with quiet, measured composure, you are refusing to play their game entirely. And when you refuse to play, they lose all their power. This is what high self-differentiation looks like in practice. You stop being other people's emotional dumpster. You refuse to let their chaos become your chaos. You recognize that their anger, their rudeness, their disrespect belongs to them. It's their low-level behavior, their poor emotional regulation, their problem, and you decline the invitation to make it yours. Now here's where all three of these principles converge into something deeper that we need to address honestly. Why is it so hard to implement these changes? Why do we keep falling back into people-pleasing patterns even when we intellectually understand they're destroying our self-respect? The answer lies in what psychologists call abandonment anxiety and external locus of control. Somewhere deep in your psychological wiring, likely installed during childhood, is a belief that says your worth as a human being depends on other people's approval. You learned, perhaps from parents who only showed love when you were obedient, or from early social experiences where acceptance required constant performance, that being liked equals being safe. This creates an unconscious equation. If people approve of me, I have value. If people disapprove of me, I'm worthless. When you operate from this equation, you become desperate to maintain approval at any cost, including the cost of your dignity, your boundaries, your time, your energy, and ultimately your self-respect. But here's what you need to understand with absolute clarity. Other people's approval is a mirage. The person praising you today can turn on you tomorrow based on nothing more than their own mood, their own insecurities, their own shifting priorities. If your sense of worth is anchored to something that's unstable, you will live in permanent anxiety, constantly monitoring others' facial expressions and tone for signs that their approval might be slipping away. People who command genuine respect have solved this equation differently. They don't ask themselves, does this person like me? They ask themselves, am I living according to my own standards? Their validation comes from internal alignment, not external applause. When you stop needing approval from others, a paradox occurs. People actually approve of you more. Humans are psychologically drawn to people who seem complete without external validation. Independence is magnetic. Neediness repels. You must break free from the addiction to recognition. If you don't treat yourself as someone valuable, no one else on this planet will do it for you. When you turn your attention inward, when you stop listening for the sound of other people's applause and start listening to your own internal compass, people begin sensing that you are not someone who can be pushed, manipulated, dismissed, or disrespected without consequence. Not because you threaten them, but because your energy communicates that you simply won't participate in dynamics that don't honor your worth. Here's your practical roadmap for the next 7 days. Concrete actions you can begin implementing immediately to shift how people perceive and treat you. First, practice deliberate solitude. Choose 2 evenings this week where you disconnect entirely from social obligations and digital noise. Put your phone in another room. Sit with yourself. Write down what you actually want, what's been bothering you that you've been avoiding, what boundaries you need to set that you've been too afraid to set. Self-respect grows in the soil of self-knowledge, and self-knowledge requires uninterrupted time with your own thoughts. Most people are so busy managing other people's expectations that they've completely lost contact with their own needs and desires. Reconnecting with yourself is the foundation everything else builds upon. Second, implement the 3-second pause. When someone makes an unreasonable request, says something dismissive, or pushes against your boundaries, do not respond immediately. Count to 3 internally. Let the silence hang. Then deliver your response in as few words as possible. No, that doesn't work for me. I'll think about it. "That's not something I can help with." Short responses delivered after a pause carry 10 times more weight than long, apologetic explanations delivered in a rush. The pause signals that you are choosing your response rather than reacting out of anxiety, and brevity signals that you don't feel the need to justify your decisions to anyone. Third, increase your self-determination in everyday micro-decisions. When someone asks where you want to eat, do not say "I don't care, whatever you want." State a preference. "I'm in the mood for Thai food tonight." When someone asks your opinion, deliver it without qualifiers. "I think we should go with option B." These seem like trivial moments, but they are actually the building blocks of personal authority. Every time you defer a decision to someone else, you communicate that your preferences don't matter. Every time you state a clear preference, you communicate that you are a person with direction, with taste, with standards, someone worth consulting, worth considering, worth respecting. Let's bring this all together. The difference between being dismissed and being respected comes down to one word: boundaries. Clear, consistent, unapologetic boundaries. Stop taking emotional responsibility for other people's reactions. Their disappointment when you say no is their feeling to manage, not your burden to prevent. Use your body and voice as tools of authority. Stand tall, speak clearly, finish your sentences, hold eye contact, and claim your space in every room you enter. When faced with disrespect, refuse to participate in the emotional game. Respond with stillness, composure, and brief, direct language that puts the ball back in their court. And above all, redirect the enormous energy you've been spending on earning other people's approval back toward yourself, toward your own growth, your own standards, your own internal validation. If you're in your 30s, 40s, 50s, or beyond, you have spent decades carrying weight for others, sacrificing your comfort for everyone else's convenience, and biting your tongue to keep the peace. You have earned the right to stop. Being what others might call difficult or less accommodating is not cruelty. It's self-preservation. The person who others call a little selfish or hard to push around is usually just someone who has finally learned to protect their own energy, and that kind of person earns more genuine respect in a month than a lifetime of people-pleasing ever produced. The moment you place yourself at the top of your own priority list is the moment the world begins making room for you. Today can be the turning point, the day you stop performing kindness for applause and start practicing self-respect as a daily discipline. If this resonated with something you've been feeling but couldn't put into words, share your own experiences in the comments. Moments when you were disrespected and how you handled it, or times when setting a boundary changed everything. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. You are inherently worthy of respect, not because of what you do for others, but because of who you are. Start believing that and watch how quickly the world starts believing it too.